There's a moment almost everyone has lived through at least once. You're speaking, mid-sentence, a story that matters, a point you've carefully built, and another voice cuts across it. It doesn't matter if it happens at the family dinner table, in a meeting, or among friends. The feeling is nearly always the same: heat rising to your face, your pulse ticking up a notch, and a very primal instinct kicking in the urge to speak louder, faster, to claw your moment back. There's nothing shameful in that reaction. But here's a truth most people never stop to notice. It's not what you say in those 3 seconds that decides how people see you afterward. It's how you react. The one who raises their voice to reclaim the floor is usually read as having lost control, even when they're right. The one who can hold that moment without ever raising their voice is, more often than not, the one the whole room remembers. And that's exactly what this video is about. 6 specific ways to respond words, and even silence itself, that let you hold your ground and your dignity in the exact instant you're interrupted, without ever needing to fight for the floor. This is how the Stoics understood power in a conversation. And once you understand it, it's not something you forget. In any conversation that gets interrupted, there are really 2 kinds of people. On one side, the insecure reactor, the one who cuts in not because they're strong, but because silence unsettles them, because not being the center of a moment is something they can't sit with. On the other side, the observer, unhurried, under no obligation to fill every gap in the room with their own voice. Stopping when you're interrupted is almost always misread as surrender, as a sign of weakness. But look closer, and timed silence can be exactly the opposite, a deliberate choice, not a defeat. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, is said to have taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we might listen twice as much as we speak, not as an invitation to passive, suffering silence, but as a reminder that the discipline to hold your tongue is a mark of inner strength, not the absence of it. But make no mistake, the goal here was never to win against the other person, never to embarrass them or prove yourself right. Chase that, and you're still trapped in the very game you were trying to walk away from. Epictetus, a philosopher who was once a slave before becoming one of the most respected teachers of his time, put it with total clarity. We do not control what others do, only how we choose to respond to it. You cannot force someone to stop cutting you off, but you can always choose how you meet it, with irritation or with composure. React with anger, and you've handed someone else the power to dictate your state of mind. Stay steady, and the one who actually holds control of the moment is the one who appeared, on the surface, to be yielding it. Here are 6 specific phrases, not to memorize and recite on autopilot, but to understand the reasoning behind each one, so you can choose whichever fits the moment you're actually in. We'll start with the simplest one, and the one that backfires on almost every interrupter who never sees it coming. 1. Go ahead, finish your thought. I can wait. When you're interrupted, instead of trying to talk louder to override the other voice, you can stop immediately and hand over the floor on your own terms. It sounds counterintuitive, but this is exactly what unsettles an interrupter the most, because what they were bracing for was resistance. This response sits close to the spirit Marcus Aurelius wrote about in Meditations, that a person's dignity doesn't come from winning some small, forgettable argument, but from holding steady on the inside, no matter what's happening outside. Yielding the floor isn't weakness. It's a way of saying, I'm steady enough that I don't need to fight for every second of airtime. 2. Finish your thought, then I'll finish mine. This response draws on the idea of fairness. One of the core virtues the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius especially, often return to when discussing how to treat others in everyday life. The line itself isn't confrontational, but it's unmistakably clear. It doesn't dodge the interruption, and it doesn't react with emotion. At its core, this is a quiet kind of agreement, granting the other person their turn to speak, while still holding on to your own. It sends a message. Your point isn't finished, and it won't be left unfinished just because it was interrupted. 3. Total silence. Sometimes the most effective response isn't a phrase at all, it's saying nothing. When you're cut off, you can simply stop and look directly at the other person with a neutral expression, not avoiding their gaze, but not hostile either. No sighing, no rolling your eyes. Most of the time, an interrupter is fishing for a reaction, anger, embarrassment, or at the very least, some sign that they've gotten under your skin. When they get nothing back, they're often the ones who end up fumbling, stumbling over their words, losing their footing. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, wrote at length about mastering anger, arguing that most of the small conflicts of daily life simply aren't worth trading away your inner peace for. Once the other person stops, you can let a beat pass, then pick your sentence back up exactly where you left off, as if the interruption never happened. This isn't avoidance. It's a form of steadiness, refusing to let one noisy moment throw you off the thread of your own thought. 4. Are you interrupting because you think I'm finished, or because you don't want to hear what I'm about to say? This response is more direct, suited for situations where the other person keeps interrupting, or is being somewhat disrespectful about it. What matters most is that the tone stays genuinely curious, never sarcastic. This is a question designed to make the other person stop and look at their own behavior, a technique close to the Socratic method, where questions are used to let someone discover the contradiction in their own reasoning or actions, rather than being told off directly. Most interrupters do it out of habit, without really thinking. A question like this forces them to engage their reason instead of their reflexes, and more often than not, they back off on their own. 5. Let me stop you right there. I wasn't finished. There's a fairly common misconception that Stoicism means passivity, accepting everything without pushing back. In truth, it's a philosophy about actively engaging with reality, not retreating from it. And sometimes, reality calls for drawing a clear line. If someone is talking over you fairly aggressively, you can hold that line with a calm, unhurried voice. The key word here is stop. It implies that you're the one setting the pace of the conversation. I wasn't finished is simply a statement of fact, not an accusation. Musonius Rufus, the teacher of Epictetus, often stressed that Stoic philosophy wasn't meant only for reflection, but for practice in the specific situations of everyday life, and holding your ground in your own speech is exactly that kind of practice. 6. Sounds like you're really fired up about this. Go ahead, you first, then me. This is a variation on actively yielding the floor, but with an added layer of psychological insight. By gently naming the other person's emotion, fired up, you're indirectly pointing out that they're the one being driven by feeling, while you remain the one still thinking clearly. Cato the Younger, a figure often invoked in Stoic stories about composure in the face of adversity, was known for never letting momentary emotion dictate his actions, even in the tensest of situations. And when you hand someone the floor completely, with no resistance at all, that can be exactly what drains their momentum to keep pushing, because there's nothing left for them to fight against. These 6 responses aren't a formula to apply mechanically in every situation. What matters more, perhaps, is recognizing this. The next time you're interrupted, there's a very short pause, just a few seconds, where you get to choose. React on instinct, or respond the way you actually want to. Marcus Aurelius, writing only for himself and no one else, kept returning to one idea. What happens outside of you matters less than how you choose to see it. Being interrupted happens every day, everywhere, to almost everyone. But how each of us responds to it, that's the part that belongs to us, the one part no one can ever take away. If one of these 6 phrases just made you think of a specific moment in your own life, a meeting, a family dinner, a time you wish you'd responded differently, leave that phrase in the comments below. Sometimes the best way to make a lesson actually stick is to write it down in your own story. If you found this perspective valuable and want more ways of thinking through everyday moments like this one, the Stoic Path is here every week, digging into exactly this kind of thing. A follow, or simply sharing this video with someone you think needs to hear it right now, that's one more way to keep lessons like this moving forward. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. See you in the next one.